afternoon, depending on where you are today. My name is Jonathan Rogers. I'm an executive coach here at Building Champions. And I want to thank you for joining us on this Champions Edge webinar. This month, we are focusing on a really, really interesting topic, and one that I think is extremely important and quite fascinating. This topic of the Generation Y. Those folks often referred to as the Millennials. Those younger people who are now in adulthood and are beginning to impact the workplace in their own unique way. I've really been looking forward to this today, and really hope that the next 30 minutes or so is really insightful and helpful for you. A couple of reminders before we get started. We are going to make available to everyone a tool. At the end of this webinar, you'll be receiving an email with a link to download this tool. And it's basically a table that summarizes the main differences between the key generations that we'll be describing here. And if you have any comments or questions about what we talk about here today, I would really invite you to send me an email. Let's get into a conversation about this. Jonathan@buildingchampions.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to communicate with you about this really important topic. Now, let's just look at the purpose. Why are we talking about this today? I really have 3 points. The first is to explore some common characteristics, attitudes, and values of this new generation and how they differ from each other. Secondly, I really want to point to some practical, actionable steps towards more effective management of, partnering with, and marketing to millennials. And thirdly, I really want to increase awareness of this topic in your organization and to create an ongoing dialogue on it. Whether you're a baby boomer or a Generation X person faced with managing and motivating them, or whether you're a millennial yourself who needs to understand your peers, this is really important. So this is a huge subject. Millennials are the most studied, the most researched report on generation in history, no doubt. And there's a wealth of information in books and articles, presentations, blogs, everything out there. And today we can just touch on the tip of the iceberg, really. But in the next 25 minutes or so, I believe I can give you a solid foundation to work from when you consider this critical topic. Fundamentally, to ignore the unique implications of their traits, attitudes, and needs, to ignore them is potentially very dangerous, I believe, to the health and ongoing sustainability of any organization. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert on this topic. I'm a business and life coach. I'm not a demographic analyst, but I have done quite a bit of reading on this topic in the recent weeks and months. And I've become somewhat fascinated with it. Secondly, as a coach, I look at this through the lens of being proactive and intentional in how you lead and motivate and impact the people around you. And perhaps more significantly, in terms of credibility, I am a baby boomer father, parent with 4 millennial kids, so maybe that clinches it, I'm not really sure. But let's see how it goes. So what is Generation Y, and how is it different to other generations? We're all formed in our early years by the prevailing factors relating to family, culture, technology, education, major socio-political events, and so on, such that significant trends appear. They're therefore recognizable behavioral traits and values and attitudes that are common to people of similar ages which differentiate the generations. You know, today, I think there are at least 5 discernible generations alive. They're called sometimes demographic cohorts. And there are at least 3 in the workforce today: baby boomers, Generation X, and Generation Y. Preceding the baby boomers, the builders, the baby boomer parents, if you like, are now mostly retired. And, you know, little is known yet of the next generation, of the O or Z, or as they're often called, the next generation after Y. So we'll see yet how they actually turn out in the workforce and in life. But let's take a look here. What I've done is just summarize, because it does get a bit confusing, these different cohorts or generations. The first we're going to look at is builders. You know, the builders were born between 25 and 45. So, you know, they're 68 to 88. An easy way to look at it, they're in their 70s and 80s. And, you know, the major socioeconomic influences that affected them were the Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, the GI Bill, of course. And, you know, the next one, the famous baby boomers. Baby boomers born between 46 and 64. So, you know, that puts them 48 to 67 or so. The way I look at it, they're in their 50s and 60s. And, you know, Vietnam, the Cold War, civil rights, the assassinations, women's rights. It was huge to put a man on the moon. Those were very formative events for this generation. Next, we look at the Generation X, and they're born between 65 and 81. So, you know, 31 to 47, they're in their 30s and 40s. And they were influenced, have been influenced by the Gulf War, the Challenger tragedy, just the onset and growth, the global issues with AIDS, divorce rates tripling here in the U.S., computers and cell phones, video games, MTV, you know, the launch of technology, very, very significant influence. And then we come to our Generation Y. And Generation Y, you know, every researcher looks at this a little differently, but I've chosen between 82 and 2000 as birth years. So that really puts them, if you like, they're in their teens, 12, if you like, upward to 30 years old or so. So teens and 20s. 9/11, Columbine, the Great Recession, the Obama, very significant Obama years that we're still in here. You can look at social media, Twitter, Facebook, all of those impacts have a huge influence on this generation. And like I mentioned, the next one coming up now, born since 2000, Generation O or Z. We don't know yet exactly what the formative, we can make some guesses at it, but we'll be watching to see. So I have, as I mentioned at the beginning, made available a tool that you can download that is really summarizes the generational differences. And the way to look at this is, say, well, what are those areas of influence in terms of families, careers, money, home ownership, work, family life, education, and so on. Now, just a quick look at this, and you'll see it when you download it. But, for example, with regard to family builders, in those earlier generations, they really saw the family as the traditional nuclear family. Fast forward now, Generation Y are seeing more merged families, even redefining what a family is. And that's a significant influence on these younger people. I think about money. Those builders would put it away, pay cash. The baby boomers, well, I'll buy now and pay later, right? And the Gen Y have an interesting perspective. They like to earn to spend. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment. With regard to home ownership and so many other major capital purchases, you know, going back, I'm a baby boomer. My parents, it was about delayed gratification. And you look at a Gen Y, by contrast now, they're somewhat skeptical because of what's happened to much of the building and other you know, from the Great Recession, very significant trends and changes and impact on them. So let's just take a closer look now at the Gen Y. And, you know, there are so many different descriptions to this Generation Y. I've chosen Generation Y, Millennials, but look at some of these other names. Generation We, the global generation, Net Generation, Echo Boomers, because, you know, it's the baby boomers' kids primarily. Generation 9/11, Entitlement, not a name they like so much, because maybe they seem to expect so much, it seems. Boomerang, and they keep coming back. I love this one, Peter Pan generation. They never seem to grow up. And my favorite, trophy kids. Why? Because, well, they're special. And they've been told that they're special from a very early age. Look at some statistics here around the Gen Y. And 80 million millennials now in the U.S. Very significant. That is over 25% of the population now. And something like 32 million are in the workforce already, and with all of those teens growing up each year, of course, more to come, as you can see. 2010, there were 17% of children or young people of working age who lived with parents. Look back to 1970, that number was 7%. So definitely a significant trend there in recent years. Something like 40% of millennials, non-Caucasian. There's a tremendous diversity here in this population, such as we have never seen before in the U.S., and a very significant characteristic. Now, of course, all people are unique, and not all millennials are the same. Some researchers even divide millennials into subgroups. But at the same time, PricewaterhouseCoopers did a major global study to understand the millennial characteristics worldwide. And it seems there really aren't any great differences between them in different countries around the world. Very significant commonalities between folks in different countries, as far from the Far East, Europe, to U.S., and so on. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to look at 9 common traits that I think need to be considered. What I'm going to do now is walk through these 9 quickly, and then we'll look at how we can be applying those. So let's look at the first one. It said that about my generation, the baby boomers, that we live to work. Well, in contrast, millennials, they like to work to live. Work is a means to an end. It's not necessarily an end in itself. Life's to be lived for fun and experience. And work and money enable them to work out all their diverse and multiple interests. The next one is that they expect attention. They're raised by the most doting and attentive parents for many generations, if not ever, in fact. So these young people expect attention because they've always had it. They were told, well, at times, winning was not important. Just to participate is what makes them special. This has evolved into that unwelcome moniker for millennials, that they are, like I said earlier, entitled. Hovered over by helicopter parents, ready to come down and rescue them at all times. They may, as a result, seem to be somewhat self-absorbed and maybe even selfish, but in many ways they are not. This next one is huge. While millennials work to live, they want to know the why before the what in their work and in their life. In fact, they need to find meaning and purpose behind what they do. This is a really critical point, and we're going to dig into this a little bit more a bit later in the presentation. The next one is that, I think we all know this, they communicate constantly. With the availability and relatively inexpensive nature of smartphones, computers, other digital devices, these have enabled millennials to stay in touch with a wide circle of people constantly and instantly. Great multitaskers, they'll use texting, Twitter, Facebook, Facebook message, instant messaging, you name it. They'll find new ways to communicate more and more instantly and constantly. And that's a major trait of these younger people. Another one is that they love to network. This is somewhat related to the constant communication. They do love to network. Funny, millennials are a bit of a paradox. They're very social, and yet technology and the so-called social media can actually isolate them from one another. And this can create a certain detachment from friends and work connections. But at the same time, they're all linked to this wide circle of friends, and they have much broader networks than previous generations, with much more numerous, diverse, and widespread populations. The next one is really interesting. This generation Y is known to be the most civic-minded generation since the builders, or even more so. They're deeply concerned with social issues, the rights of individuals, the environment, of course, and the needs of those less fortunate than themselves. I think this comes from a greater global awareness with access to so much information at all times from the Internet, as well as an increasingly, if I may say, tolerant worldview that younger people have. Another one which I'm sure many of you will recognize, I've called this postpone adulthood. There's a much reported trend for young people to stay living in their parents' homes. Coupled with this recent housing recession, this is kind of like a delayed rite of passage for millennials versus their preceding generations anyway. Single millennials, young married couples, even with kids, there isn't so much the stigma attached about living at home. And the increasing cost of higher education, the Great Recession hangover, and so on, all of this has had an impact for sure. The next one is that they love technology. Oh boy, do they. And they've always been immersed in it from a very early age. They've never known a world without it. And the way in which younger people interact with technology and media in particular has just revolutionized in recent years. It seems like they were born with a chip not so much on their shoulder, but in their head. Certainly the way my kids seem anyway. And, I'm not one of my kids, but I heard one young person quoted as saying, technology is an extension of my body. It just says it all, I think. The next one is, final one here of the 9. Millennials are very diverse. And, not to be mindful of how diverse millennials are is a big mistake. This is true racially, socially, culturally, and unlike previous generations, they're very comfortable with their diversity. They revel in it, and they celebrate it. So these 9 traits that I've gone over are not all inclusive by any means. But I want to take 3 of each of these, and talk about them in the light of managing, partnering with, and marketing to millennials. Because I think this will be particularly helpful in improving our effectiveness. So let's take a look at the first one, which is managing millennials. Let's look at this work to live. Because millennials tend to work to live, some managers see them as almost apathetic, even lazy. But they're not. In fact, they're far from it. They're driven. They love a challenge, and they work hard for a company or any organization will meet all their needs. They can, of course, be huge assets to any company or organization. But what they want, in fact, is autonomy. They want the freedom to work as they want to work. And so in managing younger employees, it's essential to be flexible. This is absolutely key. If you're flexible with their work schedules and other areas of how you're employing them, they'll put the hours in, but maybe not when you expect them to. They also don't differentiate between work time and personal time as clearly as older generations do. This impacts recruiting too. Millennials are quick to move from employer to employer, and they'll seek out any that will give them that flexibility to work as and when they want to on their terms. The next one I chose for managing is this expectation of attention. This is really important because they expect it, they've always received it. What they crave is nurturing through engagement. So a manager that takes interest in them personally is willing to invest time and effort in their development. That's the manager that's going to win them over. Ignore this one at your peril, managers. And it means not just one-on-one time, but active listening, showing genuine concern and curiosity. Always be growing in your relationship with them as an ongoing, consistent discipline, showing empathy and understanding. All of this to say that they want, guess what? A coaching relationship with their manager. And they thrive on mentorship. Now, I'm not just saying this because I work for a coaching company, although I think it's really every book and every article I've ever read on the millennials and their needs, this comes out and bubbles up usually right at the top. Invest in them in this way and then get out of the way because they will really work for you. The third one I chose here was the need for meaning. Some managers may see them as apathetic in their work, but in fact, that might be more like indifference, just not having a reason to care. And this is dangerous because they have no qualms in changing employers to find that reason. So why is this, I wonder? Well, if you think of the social influences on this generation, technologies open up their access to an awareness of so many global needs and woes, tsunami, Katrina, natural disasters. They instantly know about everything that's happening in the world. The environmental movement is such that now being green isn't just cool, but it's actually a real responsibility. There has to be, for millennials, a call to action to do something about it, and they are willing to jump in. They're looking to have an impact on the world. If you don't connect what they do to a higher purpose, you're going to lose them, or you're not going to attract them in the first place, and that can be really critical to the organization. So what about partnering with millennials? What are some of the traits that you really need to leverage? Whether as some of our clients are in real estate, some are in business, some not-for-profit, people listening here today, you're in all kinds of different businesses. In some way, you have partners that are really critical to your business relationship, whether they be vendors or clients, distributors, dealers. And for each of these, I think there are three really important traits. The first one, as you see, is communicate constantly. Younger partners want to do business this way. Email is useful, but it may not elicit the kind of response that they're looking for as fast enough. It may be an hour or two, and that can be too long for millennials. Their preferred communication is very informal but frequent. Gen Xers and baby boomers need to be connecting in the same way, and they're expected to respond instantly. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to have answers right away. They just need to stay in touch. And not just during work hours either. It could be evenings, weekends too. But millennials do understand your desire to live a life. So if you set boundaries around communication response times, they will respect them. This is really important. So there's therefore, well, there we go. Let's look at the next one there. Excuse me. They will not differentiate so much between personal friends and work relationships. They love to network. This is the next one. To them, relationships are important, and to network is an intentional means to build and maintain those relationships. So it's critical to be sure to be a member of your partner's network. Leverage the technology they use to blur the lines between personal and work networks, and you do the same. And make sure that you are dialed in and connected into their networks. The next one around partnering is social responsibility. We talked about this. Current and potential partners will be drawn to partner with you if there's a greater good being served. Inside or outside work-related activities, invite them into your non-profit initiatives or charities, or better yet, show interest and participate in theirs. Even if it's only a very minor part of your involvement together, it will make a difference to the partnership relationship. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So let's look at the third area, marketing to millennials. The first characteristic I want to consider here is this notion of this postponed adulthood. I mentioned their buying habits. There is a greater skepticism toward major capital purchases, or even just spending money as a whole. Having seen their parents maybe lose their homes and other things through the Great Recession, this is in fact affecting all their buying habits. So there's a bit of a delayed opportunity, I think, more so than there has been with the older generations. Targeting older millennials then would be more fruitful. They're more thrifty, they're more cautious, they're not about conspicuous consumption, it seems, in general. And so be aware of that as you are marketing your products and services to them. The next one, of course, is they love technology. Well, from a marketing perspective, this is really interesting. The level of engagement with and in digital media definitely increases their responsiveness to messaging. For them, it's not a passive engagement, though, as it is with, say, television. It's an active engagement that they want. They want to actively be engaged in the conversation with a brand. They want to discover them themselves and not be pushed into making choices. You know, they have less trust for corporate brands than previous generations. They're much more likely to buy based on peer referral or direct experience rather than promotion and paper advertisements. And so social media is really huge here to leverage this trend. You know, connect with millennials where they are versus trying to pull them to hear your message where you want to be. Thirdly, just briefly, this notion of diversity. This diversity affects their key drivers. What they value and how they make decisions are different to previous generations. Globalization and instant access to so much information at all times has really driven that. Demonstrating sensitivity to the fact that not all 20-somethings or potentially in the market for your products and services are the same. You really have to understand that. Segment your market. Understand who it is you're talking to in this diverse community. I want to finalize here in summary with this last point about this need for purpose, this need for meaning. More than any other generation, millennials need to have this. They're motivated by it more than anything else. They want to know the why, like I said, behind everything. They care deeply about so many things, and not just necessarily what their parents cared about. Statistically, studies showed a large majority of current students in college today believe it was essential or very important to help others in need. Something like 83% volunteered in some way, at least occasionally, an all-time high. Giving back is no longer nerdy. It's a desire to make a difference. To miss this as an employer or a business partner or a marketer can be very risky. Young people need to understand your vision. What is the core why? Why do you do what you do? And what does the long-term future look like? Give them a reason to care. Nail that and be consistently clear in communicating it. And you need to reinforce it by connecting their work, their role, what they do in the organization, to how they could specifically contribute to your core purpose. And you'll have engaged, dedicated, hard-working millennials adding value daily to the business. And you'll have young people that want to stick around and make it happen for you. Well, that concludes my presentation. I do just want to remind everyone listening that in September we have our annual experience, Building Champions Experience again. You can see the date, September 17th to the 20th. You can log on to that website there and go ahead and register. We'd encourage you to do so. It's filling up fast, so I'd encourage you to go there and get registered. I have a couple of resources here. Actually, 4 books I would recommend. Managing the Millennials, Generation IY, and a couple here, Why Size Your Business by Jason Dorsey. And this final one, Plugged In by Tamara Erickson, is actually written for millennials, their guide to thriving at work. So very, very good resources I'd recommend for different perspectives. I just also want to reiterate that if you want to engage with me in an email conversation, send an email to me at jonathan@buildingchampions.com. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, I want to thank you for your time today and wish you a very, very happy day and happy